client was telling me her biggest challenge is getting grants. And I completely understand her point because that's a part of the job description and grants are hard to get. My PhD advisor, who is a super successful physicist, who I respect and admire a lot, was telling me recently, I spend a lot of time writing grants that don't get funded. So completely normal, you're not nuts if you're finding it hard to get your grants funded. The numbers back you up on this. So 20 plus or minus 10% of personal grants are getting funded. Starting grant, for example, or an RO1, or an advanced grant. And even less, 10 plus or minus 5% of consortium grants, where you have a team of people and you're getting instrument funding, for example, are getting funded. So that is a pretty difficult funding environment. However, as a scientist, it's part of your job to get your research projects funded, even in industry. So in this video, I'm gonna cover my 6P equation to getting your projects funded. You're gonna walk away with a quantitative step-by-step approach so that you can have a strategy to maximize the probability that your grants are gonna get funded. If we haven't met yet, I'm Kathy Teresia. I'm a physicist and a career coach for scientists. I teach practical, quantitative methods that you can actually use to create a career and therefore a life that you love. If you're not sure exactly how to do that in this competitive scientific job market, hit that subscribe button below and the bell next to it to get my weekly training videos and take the scientific superpower quiz that hundreds of scientists have used to help them identify their particular scientific strengths at kathy.science/quiz. I developed this framework to help myself identify my particular strengths and articulate them during my third job hunt, during my second postdoc. And now I use it to help my clients do that too. And I'll link it down below for you. All right, let's get right to it. The 6P equation, getting a grant, is a function of these 6 variables. P1, the project. This is the science. And you most likely have this down rock solid. You're really, really, really good at this. So comment below if you agree. However, if you're getting feedback back from your grant reviewers that you're just like, oh, they're right, I need to fix that thing. If that happens to you, okay, I get it. That's part of the grant application process, and it's a helpful part of the process. For example, I was giving similar feedback like this to one of my clients. And it was about the vision and the scope of her grant. And she was like, that's true. My PI, who glanced at the grant for like 30 seconds, also said that too. And even though it's due like right away, this is a big hole in the science itself and the scope and the vision and the technical details and the preliminary data that I really need to fix. So take advantage of those reviews in order to make sure that that science is solid. The whole grant rests on this P1. The project has to be incredible. That's the first and most important variable. P2 is the probability that your project will be successful. So think of this as the practicality. You're answering the question, how practical is this project? How likely is it that it can succeed, the science itself? And you want to aim for the result of this equation, the P&A equation, if you're inside Career Lab. You want that to be around 0.7 because a P of less than 0.6 sort of suggests that the project is too ambitious. You won't be able to do it. And this is you if you're struggling to get, like one of my clients had a Marie Curie that she was writing, and if you're struggling to get the preliminary data in order to support that grant application, then this is something that you might want to revisit, this equation. do I have a 60% probability that this actual project will work? A p greater than 0.8, you really don't want that either, because that means it's just not risky enough. It's not ambitious enough. As a really ambitious person, that's around where my p's tend to hover. And if there is like a greater than 80% chance that this project can be done, then you're not taking enough risks. There's not enough courage involved in the project itself. So this is probably you. If you're getting reviews back like, this isn't novel enough. For example, this wasn't a grant, but my NAR paper, my first paper during my PhD, the reviewer wrote, this is just another single molecule stretching paper with just one of these proteins that this lab works on. There's nothing more to it than that. And that's even a kind version of the comments. I'm not gonna quote the exact comments. And so that indicates like, okay, this isn't ambitious enough in order to really get funded. If you have my grant writing template, then you've entered your specific data into the P&A equation to understand where your probability, the riskiness, if you will, for this project lands and if it's in the right range. But even if you don't have all the data or you don't have the template, then those are some qualitative ways that you can tell, am I in the right range for where this variable 2p should be? P3 is the program, the actual funding program. And the question you're answering with this particular variable is, does the scope of the grant that I've written, is it exactly what this funding body is looking for, what this program or this grant call is actually looking for? For example, if you're a new-ish professor, a starting grant that's gonna fund your lab requires a broad and long-term research agenda that puts your plan for your lab and your research in context within the field. If you have a well-established lab and you're going for a consortium grant, that funding program requires that you wouldn't be able to do that research on your own, that all of the collaborators, all of the expertise within that consortium are necessary in order to accomplish those aims. P4 is the people, the scientist or the scientists. So let's start with you, the scientist. Your grant needs to pass the Bachelor Test. After reading it, a bachelor student could tell me who you are, what you do, and why you do it. My career lab postdocs, you've already nailed part 3, why you do it. This is your purple unicorn factor, why it has to be you and no one else will do. A question I got last week was, how come I don't write that down anywhere in my application? It's internal work, getting that purple unicorn factor, using the exact formula, why it has to be you, and making sure that that equation comes out to greater than 0.9. No one else can say that with 90% probability. If you haven't done that internal work, if for some reason other people could do your research, other people could write that grant, it shows in your grant application. The review panel will know. If you're getting feedback like, I don't think that this person could do this project, then your purple unicorn factor, your track record, why you're unique, why you're special, why you're the only person for this project doesn't really show. And either that's because you haven't done that work or you haven't written it well or communicated it that well. And we'll get to that in P6. So if you're getting feedback like that, go back there and check to make sure that it's super clear why you and only you should be doing this. The scientist is the right person to be doing this. Don't interpret this to be, I'm not a good enough scientist. For example, one of my clients who's a brilliant scientist, an amazing scientist, has been in her new tenure track position for a year already, got a starting grant rejected with, I don't think that this person could do this, that there are too many collaborators or relies too heavily on collaborators. And that's not necessarily true that she couldn't do this, but the grant itself was not focused completely on her expertise. It was in the gray area where other people might be able to do this. It might be possible. So that's when you want to make sure that you're nailing that. The project itself is tailored to you. Great, have collaborators, but make sure that those collaborators couldn't do it without you. And once you've nailed that, why it's you, we then turn to why these people, the collaborators that you've added on this grant. My second postdoc advisor, her name is, he's really, really good at getting consortium grants funded. So one day I was asking him, I think this was even before I was his postdoc, how is it that you get all these grants funded with all the right collaborators and before you weren't getting them funded? So what's the difference? Like, what changed? And I wanted to steal that, of course, to get my own grants funded. And I did do that, and I teach this to my clients as well. His secret was I'm looking for the right collaborators. I'm making sure that whatever gap in my skill, whatever is missing, people are coming back with, well, we don't really believe that you could do that. You really need an expert in XYZ. Then I'm making sure I'm finding a collaborator that's fitting that hole exactly, but that collaborator can't do what I do. So a specific example is the microscopy. He had a collaborator at AML who's building the microscope, but he is expert in that particular protein. He has a huge track record to show that. And then because he's just not the imaging expert at that time, he's not going to build his own microscope. He has this collaborator that will do that piece of the project. So I copied his strategy in order to optimize P4, the people variable. P5 is the place, so the institution. You're answering the question, is this the only place where this particular research can be done? For example, when I was at Imperial, I was pretty special. There's not 100,000 single molecule biophysicists running around. So that's unique, and the collaborators are there, and the network is there, and everything is in place. So, okay, that's the institution to be doing that because I'm unique at that place. And other places, the collaborators and the network isn't quite there, so I wouldn't have the materials or access to the materials in the same way as I would at Imperial. But once I moved to Leiden, everybody and their mother is a single molecule biophysicist around here. So I had a problem. Okay, I have to answer the question, why Leiden, in a different way. And a really good example of this is one of my clients who works on tumor cells from patients. And she is at a medical school in London, and she is getting the cells from the tumors of patients as they're operated on. So yeah, why that institution? It can only be done there. If you can make it that solid, that would be one for this variable for P5 place. P6 is the proposal itself. How well is it written? Funding panels are really broad these days. So can any scientist on that review committee understand it? So if you're getting reviews back on your grant like, oh, but I already covered that, they just didn't get it. If that's the feeling that you're having, that you covered it, but the reviews indicate that you didn't, then that says something about maybe you want to have a quick look at how clearly it's written. P6 maybe could use some work in your case. For example, I wrote a Marie Curie grant myself when I was a postdoc, and one of my friends actually was reviewing that grant, and she was saying really clearly that when you say in vivo, you as a physicist mean inside a cell. But for us, in vivo is inside an animal. And this was a biology panel that I was submitting to, so when they read in vivo, they're gonna be like, where are the mice? So just be careful and clear about who's on the committee, and are you using the terminology appropriately so that it applies across disciplines. Remember that a confused committee member is not going to recommend your proposal for funding, not going to go to bat and fight for it when it comes time to rank those proposals. So that's P6. If you are in my single molecule leadership lab, I know that you have optimized all 6 Ps. So here is a bonus tip for you, which falls under 3P, the program. Choose strategically which section to submit to. I'm running a little beta testing of the one-on-one single molecule career lab to see if that works in a group setting. And I was just saying to them last week, you have to choose the department within a company that you applied to, or also the department within a academic institution strategically. Choose that strategically in this competitive job market. That's how you're going to get your dream job. And that applies to your grant as well. You're going to choose strategically which section you apply to. And I actually learned this from watching my husband get his ERC advanced grant. He's also a biophysicist, so he could have applied to the biology section or he could have applied to the physics section. And everybody he knew was applying to physics, as you do. I also, when I was doing the starting grant, it's the same panel division, and I was applying to physics as well. So he thought to himself, everybody that I know is applying there. All his colleagues were going for the ERC advanced that summer, it seemed like. So he thought, okay, I'm going to apply to the biology panel where I'll stand out. This particular section will be more amazed at what I do relative to the physics section and where the biology is what's making me special. And I asked him, like, how did you figure that out? That's really smart. I'm copying that, but how did you figure that out? And he explained that when he was going for the grant that funded his postdoc, Antoine Vanoyen was also in that interview room. And he was just like, oh shit, they're not going to give a grant to two physicists. In the end, they did. Both he and Antoine got that grant. However, he recognized at that time, okay, I have to think strategically about where I apply and what makes me special. Not just what my work is, but where are all my colleagues applying? And therefore, how can I apply someplace else to a different section so that I can be different? That's an extra bonus tip for those of you who have nailed your 6P equation. And there you have it. That's how my clients are still getting grants, even with funding rates of 10 to 25%. So if you're stressed, fair enough, about getting a grant, like my client was, use the 6P equation. Rate yourself from 0 to 1 on all 6 of these variables. P1, the project. 0, the science sucks. 1, it's going to win a Nobel Prize. Those are the extremes. Those are the boundary conditions. P2, probability. 0, it's impossible. Not even God could do this. 1, you could do this in your sleep. So remember that you want to be somewhere around 0.7 on that particular one. P3, the program. And remember, think strategically about the program itself and the section that you apply to. P4, people. 0, anyone with a PhD could do this. 1, only you could do this. P5, place. I could do this in my basement. Or 1, it can only be done at this particular institution. P6, the proposal. 0, it's written in Latin. 1, every single scientist on that review panel can understand it and go to bat for it, argue for it when it comes time to rank the proposals. If the result of your calculation is P average greater than 0.9, then most likely you'll be able to go on to the next step, or your grant will be in the funded pile if there's no interview. And speaking of interviews, one of my clients was panicking, like, oh God, what do I do if I do get invited to interview? So that's what we're gonna cover next week. How to interview, what to say when you actually get to the interview. My 4C equation. For those of you who have gone through Leadership Lab with me one-on-one and your C average is greater than 0.9, there's going to be an extra bonus tip specifically for you. If this was helpful and you're going to use the 6P equation to write your next grant, forward this video to your colleagues and fellow scientists who are writing grants and could also use this strategy to get their grants funded. Let me know so I can make more helpful videos by commenting below with questions, comments, concerns, or just by hitting like and subscribe. And I'll see you next week.